Thank you. I want to call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Elmhurst Zoning and Planning Commission. First, I need to check to make sure everyone who is on this call remotely can hear me. So first, in the applicant room, Emily Egan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Commissioner McCoy, can you hear me? You are muted.
Dick, how you doing?
Okay, yes, I can.
Where do you want to be right here?
Eileen Franz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
In the public comment room, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Commissioner Pittman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Snyder, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Callaway, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Commissioner Burns, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Court reporter Kiki Andriopoulos, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
And Commissioner Dave Garland, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. All right, I will now ask City Planner Eileen Franz to please call the roll to establish a quorum.
Commissioner Burns.
Here.
Commissioner Callaway.
Here.
Commissioner Garland.
Here.
Commissioner Hoffman is absent. Commissioner McCoy.
Here.
Commissioner Pittman.
Here.
Commissioner Snyder.
Here.
Commissioner Uditsky is absent. Chair Rose.
Here. We have a quorum. All right, thank you. The first item of business we have is public comment. I'm going to ask Mike Kopp. I see someone in the public comment room if they are there to comment on a particular case or a general issue of zoning.
So, no, there's not.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask Eileen and Emily to please check either both voicemail and email to see if anyone has requested time during public comment.
No emails.
Okay.
No voicemails.
Great, thank you very much. The next item of business is receipt of written communication. Have we received any written communication that was not posted on board docs?
No, we have not.
Okay. The next item of business is really the business before the committee. And the first item we have is the approval of minutes of the June 1st, 2021 Zoning and Planning Commission meeting. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes and a second? Commissioner Snyder moves, and a second, Commissioner McCoy. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to be made to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I will ask Eileen Franz to please call the roll.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, those minutes are approved. Next item of business we have is case 21P02, the Giuliano final plat of subdivision. I believe, Eileen, you are going to introduce that item to us.
Yes, thank you. So if you'll recall, earlier this year, the applicant came forward with a preliminary plat of subdivision. It's the properties at 954 and 956 North York. The southern property, 954, is interested in purchasing the rear 100 feet of 956, which is the rear of the Wendy's property. So the preliminary plat was approved. And at that time, the applicant had not actually drawn up the final plat of subdivision. So we have the actual final plat of subdivision document that was added to board docs. And now the applicant just needs to go through the steps again before the commission, the committee, and the council for that final approval.
So we need a motion to approve the final plat of subdivision.
Correct.
Can I have a motion and a second to approve this final plat of subdivision? Commissioner Snyder moves. A second. Commissioner Garland seconds. Commissioner Snyder.
Thank you. So yes, we really did deliberate this the first time around and nothing has really materially changed other than it's formalized. So it makes a lot of sense to do this and I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Commissioner Garland?
I would agree completely with Commissioner Snyder. Would only add that the city has gone through that and sees no issues with it, and I would be supportive of it as well.
Thank you. Any other commissioner want to make a comment on this? I only have one comment. It's just a question. I totally approve this. I think this makes a whole lot of sense. But in looking at this final plat of subdivision, I'm kind of curious why one of the lots is goes towards the York Road. I mean, it's smaller. I'm just curious why that is. If you look at track 1 and track 2, one is 310 feet plus the anyway, they're just not, they don't line up parallel. I mean, do you have any, I'm just curious why.
So I believe there was a roadway dedication for one of them many years ago and not the other.
Okay, right. Is that ever going to cause us problems in the future?
I don't think so.
Fine, okay. That's a very, yeah, I just noticed that, that's a really odd thing to see, so, okay. Seeing no other questions on this or comments, I would ask Eileen to please, we need to check public comment on this if anyone wishes to make public comment. Let's do that just to be safe.
No emails, and I think Emily just went to check the voicemail.
No voicemails.
Okay, and I will ask Eileen Frantz to please call the roll on the motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, thank you, that is approved. Great, I think that'll be, as they noted before, the lot behind there is, I love the term, was disheveled, to say the least, and so that really is going to shake that up. So this is great. Glad to see it moving forward. So, righty. Is that Mr. Inskeep in public comment room? I believe it is. So, thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Inskeep.
it is.
Thank you, Mr. Inskeep, for your work on this.
That's cool.
All right. The next item of business is the Sadiq conditional use permit and variation.
Thank you.
Where we moved into deliberation, I believe, but where we are on this is, let me just set the stage. It's my understanding there are two motions that were really open at this point. One was a motion by Commissioner Burns and seconded by Commissioner Uditsky to approve the conditional use for the car wash. And there is a second motion made by Commissioner Burns, seconded by Commissioner Garland, to approve the conditional use for the restaurant. Embedded in those, and I think we're going to take the method we've used before, which is we're going to talk about this as a whole, but embedded in each one of those conditional uses are 3 variations. So for the car wash itself, there is a variation to reduce the reservoir spaces from 35 to 24. That's the first variation. The second variation is to reduce the corner side setback to allow for the vacuums, and that would go from 40 feet to 0 feet. And the third variation would be to reduce the western setback for the shed, and that would be from 20 feet to 4 feet. So those are the variations for the car wash. Embedded in or the other ask here in the conditional conditional use for the restaurant are 3 further variations. One is to reduce the front setback, again, that's on the east side, for an addition to the restaurant from 40 feet to 27.58 feet, and that's a 31% reduction. Second is to reduce the parking requirements from 37 to 28. It's a 24% reduction. And the third is to reduce the interior side setback to allow for the addition from 10 feet to 4.75 feet. And that looks large at 52% reduction, but it's really just about a 5-foot reduction. So this is on the floor at this point. So I'm going to suggest that we discuss this as a whole, and then we will vote on each one of those variations, and we will vote on the conditional use. Are commissioners in agreement with that? I think it just makes more sense for us to do it that way. So I'm going to ask first, let's take up the car wash. Commissioner Burns, you made the motion. So would you like to I'm going to ask you to start off at any point, and then we can, but let's discuss this as a whole, and then we'll move to the recommendations itself. Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Chair Rose. Well, I believe we did spend some time talking about the car wash, the fact that it had been moved south, and this number of cars that might be coming through. I know Commissioner Uditsky had some comments on what his thoughts were on that, and whether or not.
Commissioner Burns, I'm sorry to interrupt. I did get an email from our city engineer that might be relevant to your discussion.
Very good.
I can read that into the record now, if that's appropriate.
Please.
Sorry.
Yes.
Apologies for the interruption. All right. This is from Kent Johnson, city engineer. It says, Emily, regarding Yorkie's pending zoning case 21 PO1, and comments by the commission a week or two ago, I wanted to provide a quick email. My understanding was that the commission was concerned with the vehicular travel area between the proposed car wash and the restaurant to the north. In reviewing the revised site plan and the information provided by the applicant, city staff finds the proposed travel area consisting of 3 9-foot wide travel lanes to be adequate for vehicular flow through the site. City staff also understands that some suggestions for curbing or vertical lane delineators may have been suggested at the commission meeting. However, city staff doesn't find this type of infrastructure to be necessary at this site, and staff would have concerns that it would limit the flexibility of customers circulating the site and may make snow plowing very difficult at this site. The applicant has made modifications to this particular vehicular travel area of the site since their initial application, and the city staff believes that this will provide functional area for moving cars through the drive-through line out of the car wash and other cars simply exiting the site.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Burns, you want to continue with your comments?
Thank you. So with that statement from our city engineer, I believe most of our concern was with the vehicular access between the proposed new car wash and the Yorkies building. And I did feel that with the addition of a third lane that they have pretty much satisfied it from my perspective. And now with the statement by the city engineer, I believe that at least for my purposes that that's satisfied.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other commissioner wish to make comments on this at this point? I'll make a comment because I was concerned about that initially as well. And thought, oh, maybe those bollards are a great idea, or a little curb. And the more I thought about it, I actually went back up to the site this week and just kind of looked at it with a different eye and thinking about that. And, you know, I think that with proper delineation of those lanes, and that's going to be up to the applicant to keep those painted, keep really so it's clear that that there's 3 lanes, and the arrows, I think that my concerns with that certainly are lessened. So for the car wash, and that really allows for the restaurant use in between, that is not a concern to me. I also began looking at this. I think that, I mean, it's being one car wash is being replaced with another, and the variations that they're asking for, I don't think are, I don't think they're major. The reservoir spaces, I can't even imagine. I've never seen more than 4 or 5 cars there, much less 24 cars. Now, I wish them good business. I hope their business improves. But even at that, I just cannot imagine that reducing those reservoir spaces is going to be that troublesome. And in fact, this is something that city staff, I would love to see as we look at new codes. Is this really a realistic number for reservoir spaces for a car wash? I'm not sure that it is, but that would be something that we should probably look at. Reducing those side setbacks for the vacuums, 100%, these are vacuums. So to try to put a vacuum in 40 feet doesn't make any sense to me. And for the shed, I think that makes some sense. I also looked at the conditional use for the restaurant and those variations in there. The setback in the east, that front setback might be more of concern to me if they didn't already have that little patio thing there. So I think that's, where I was expecting this to be like Culver's, where they've got 2 lanes and you've got one here and one there. And the more I looked at it, I think that's not really very reasonable. So I'm okay with that. Reducing the interior side setback is not problematic to me. Reducing the parking requirement, I may be more concerned about that, but not enough to not approve this at this point. Reducing it, they're increasing the size of the building and then reducing parking. I'm not so sure how that will work. I'd be curious what other commissioners think of that. So a lot of the concerns that I had, I'll be honest with you, I believe have been reconciled with this. So other comments from Commissioner Callaway?
Yeah, there were 2 things that I wanted to address, and I think one is for the city staff, and the second one is the applicant. The one thing that still has me a little bit concerned, based upon the applicant's response to the question at our last meeting, are those parking spaces that are along York Road that are in the car wash area. When I posed the question of who would be using those spaces, I think we got a number of responses, but one of them was that could be parking for the restaurant. And I'm still a little bit concerned about someone parking there for the restaurant and crossing what could be, these 3 lanes of traffic. So I don't know if there's some signage or some sort of stipulation that could be, could be implemented to deal with that.
Or could it be designated as employee parking? I mean, sometimes people from the restaurant are going to park there anyway, but designated as employee parking, that means that it's going to be full around in that time.
Yeah, I think minimizing the opportunity for restaurant patrons to park there. So if the spots are taken because it's employee parking and there's signs up that say, not restaurant parking or something like that, I think that would make me a little more comfortable. The other thing, and I might be getting out of the discussion that we're talking about right now, but when we had asked about bike racks, it was kind of if I recall, the response was kind of an afterthought, and that hadn't really been thought of. So I guess I'd like to know whether there was any more research or thoughts from the applicant on how they intend to deal with that.
I'm going to ask the applicant to really respond to those 2 things, because the applicant did say, Mr. Sadiq, I think you did say a couple weeks ago that you would be able to direct employee parking to that area, that you would use that primarily for that. And there's, what are there, 6 spaces there?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know if we need to be sworn in for this response.
This is not a public, is this a public hearing? So it does need to be, does he need?
No, public hearing's over.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think he does.
Thank you.
Sure. Last time that we spoke, I believe that I said that those 6 spots on the car wash side would be used for employee parking because of the concerns that you guys had about crossing 3 lanes of traffic. And then as far as the bike rack, we'll be more than happy to put those in. And the way that we were, when I spoke with the architect, we can do it 2 ways. We can do it on the either on the north corner of the building or on the east corner. We can do a little sidewalk there to where, and I'm not sure how many you guys require, maybe 2 or 3. We'll be more than happy to provide those.
So the requirement is 5% of the parking required for the business, which off the top of my head, I can't remember how many parking spaces are required here. But it would be 5% of what is required.
So that,
And we'll be more than happy to comply with that.
that would be basically 1 rack if it's 5%. That's what it sounds like. But you would calculate that and they could put that in. So, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Callaway, do you have any comments to that or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, do you intend to, there are 6 spots. I don't know how many people you have working any particular time, but do you also intend to put some signage there to designate those 6 spots as employee only parking?
Absolutely. We can do 2 things. We can do employee parking only, or we can say car wash parking only. So whatever you guys would feel more comfortable, we would be more than happy to do.
Okay.
I think either is a good solution.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do too. So I think either one, as you begin to look at your business, either one of those would make some sense. If it makes more sense that be for the car wash only, then that's, so be it. But if you don't see people in the car wash using that, then use it as employee. I think that's fine.
Okay.
Other thoughts or questions any commissioner has on this? Commissioner Snyder.
Thank you. Yes, I, looking at this case in relationship to each of the standards, I really think that it does meet all of the standards and that the safety concerns we had, I think with that 6 parking spaces that Commissioner Callaway just talked about, I think that's primarily been resolved with those parking spaces being designated for employees only. My concern with that when we had the initial discussion was that the applicant had said customers may potentially pull in there for employees to run out and deliver food. And then I had this concern over, pedestrian employees running back and forth across those lanes. But I think all of those safety issues have really kind of been addressed. And I think this is going to be, this is an improved traffic flow plan with the one-way movement wrapping around Yorkies. And the curb cut with those 2, or the curb that's going to be installed along the front or the eastern side of Yorkies, directing those patrons who are parked and waiting to go back around the restaurant. I think that's going to help as well. So I think that, this really, these meets all of the standards, both the car wash and Yorkies, and I don't really have any further concerns. So,
Great. Thank you. Anyone else, any other commissioner wish to make a comment? Commissioner Pittman.
Thank you, Chair Rose. Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Commissioner Snyder said. I do think it hits all the points for the conditional use permit and for the variance. I also wanted to just say that I think when this first came to us, it had a lot of issues, and we've talked through a lot of issues, and the applicant has tweaked the plan to address those issues. So I do think that we've come a long way from what was originally presented to us, and a lot of my initial concerns that I had have been addressed. So I do support this. I think it will really improve that area, especially with the new car wash. And I think Yorkie's business will be vastly upgraded and improved as well. So all good things for the community.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? I just want to say in response to Commissioner Pittman that, keep this in mind, when we talk subsequent to this about PUD, the PUD ordinance, et cetera, this is a case where it really would have been helpful if this could have come in under that. It really would have been helpful. And so we need to think about how that would go forward in the future. So other comments or questions or thoughts about this? Okay. Seeing none, we probably should vote on the variations first. And then, so when we then take up the conditional use, it would be with these variations in mind. Okay, but that's, so for example, wouldn't be injurious to the use, enjoyment of other property, wouldn't impede normal development, everything is adequate. So I would suggest, unless Eileen says differently, that we first take up each one of the variations and vote on those. And then we will vote on the conditional use for the car wash. And then we'll take up the variations for the restaurant and then vote on the conditional use. Does that seem logical, Eileen? I think it's logical to me, but one never knows. So, okay, so can I ask for a motion from a commissioner to approve the variation that reduces the reservoir spaces from 35 to 24 for the car wash? A motion and a second. Commissioner Snyder moves, Commissioner Pittman seconds. Commissioner Snyder?
Thank you. Yes, I think we've kind of covered this, and Chair Rose, you covered it during your comments about the reservoir spaces, the requirement from 35 to 24 for the car wash, and it makes a lot of sense in terms of the use and volume of this car wash to reduce those spaces. So that makes sense, and I'll support it.
Okay, do you want to address any of the standards, or I'll ask Commissioner Pittman to do
yes.
that?
Okay, no, so the standards variation, plight of the owners due to unique circumstances. So the unique circumstance really, this is a corner property, an existing car wash. They're working with existing infrastructure and just trying to make more sense of things in terms of the way things flow and function. I'm not really sure that it's a unique circumstance per se, but I think it's added, what has been presented is adequate to meet that. Second standard, the variation if granted will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. I think we can agree the use isn't changing. It's just a refresh of, and it's the existing use. So the standard's been met. Number 3, property in question cannot yield a reasonable return or provide the owner or tenants reasonable enjoyment of the property if permitted to be used only under the conditions allowed by the regulations in its zone. So yes, this car wash is really outdated. It's outlived its useful life. And so, in order for the applicant to yield a reasonable return, he really does need to be allowed to rebuild. So I believe all these standards have been sufficiently met.
Thank you. Commissioner Pittman, any further comments?
I agree with Commissioner Snyder. All the standards have been met. The reservoir spaces, this is, as we've discussed, and the applicant has discussed, this is a self-service car wash. So you're not talking about people waiting to get through. So it really honestly makes no sense that our requirements are that high. And I think you've pointed that out, Chair Rose, that we really need to look at that, because for a self-service car wash, it just really doesn't make any sense. It's putting a big burden on somebody who's trying to run these. So I do think that it makes a whole lot of sense to reduce that number.
Thank you. Comments from any other commissioner? Seeing none. I don't think we have to get, right, we don't have to do public comment, et cetera. So seeing none, I'm going to ask Eileen Franz to please call the roll on this motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner Garland,
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy,
yes,
Chair Rose.
Yes, thank you. That variation is approved. I need a motion now to approve the request, the variance request to reduce the corner side, the southeast corner side setback for vacuums from 40 feet to 0 feet. But before I do that, I want to ask Eileen for just a clarification on that. Does that mean the vacuum is on the property line or it's right inside the property line?
I believe it's right inside the property line.
Okay, so everyone knows what this vote is for. It's to reduce the corner southeast setback for the vacuums from 40 feet to 0 feet. Can I have a motion to approve and a second? Commissioner Burns moves and a second, Commissioner Garland. Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Chair Rose. This is another aspect of the unique character of this site and trying to reconfigure it so it yields modern, highest and best use for the property owner. The vacuums, it's true that they're considered as objects that are subject to setback requirements. But many car washes that I've seen throughout the Chicago area have the vacuums at the property line. It tends to be the most logical place to put them. In this case, I think it's a good design, it serves the property well. And it's not as if we have a building that's going to, a complete wall of structure going to 0 setback there. These are going to be these individual pieces of equipment that really don't take up much space. So I believe the unique circumstance is satisfied. And I believe the other variation standards are satisfied as well. This will not have impact on the surrounding area. And again, in order to achieve the ideal highest and best use of this site and get a reasonable return, this needs to be done.
Thank you. Commissioner Garland, do you have any further comments?
I really don't. I think that this is a logical place to put the vacuums based on the configuration of the site. And I don't see that it's going to, cause any harm. In fact, I think it's probably in their highest and best use spot on the piece of property. And for all the reasons that Commissioner Burns discussed regarding the standards, I'm in agreement with as well.
Thank you. Yes, I know a lot of people will see, oh, it's reduced 100%, and I think that's a little misleading on this. This makes some sense. Commissioner Snyder.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that, putting the vacuums at 40 feet from the property line would really it would just really be problematic and not be useful at all to any of the patrons of the car wash. So it really just makes a ton of sense from a functional standpoint to put them there. And of course, I completely agree with Commissioner Burns's assessment as well. So,
in some ways it would be more, I think it'd be a safety hazard because you'd have people coming from one end to get to that, people come from the other, and it would be, I think it would be worse to have that. So I would agree with you. Any other thoughts or comments on this? All right, I'm going to ask Eileen to please call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy.
yes,
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, thank you. That variation, we will recommend approval. I'm going to move now to the variations for the restaurant, and then we'll take up the conditional uses for both of them. So the first one, it would be to reduce, can I get a motion to reduce the parking requirements from 37 to 28, which is a 24% reduction? Can I get a motion and a second? Commissioner Garland?
Chair Rose, just a point of order. Was there not one more variance for the car wash? Did I miss that?
No, because it looks like it is, and I was confused by that as well, but they are going above what is required.
Got it.
Okay, and I thought that
Forgive me.
I thought, oh,
Okay.
geez, no. It was confusing to me as well. I think you're talking about, let me make sure I get this. The one that is going from 40 feet, but it's going to 48.9 feet. So it's going above what is required. So I'm not sure why it's on the chart.
Chair Rose, I believe Commissioner Garland may be referring to the variation from setback requirements for the shed for the car
shed.
from 20 feet to 4 feet.
Did we?
Correct.
Hello, thank you. You're right. I'm just so excited to move this forward that it's on my list, but I'm jumping right to it right away. Thank you. Commissioner Garland, I always count on you to keep me honest. So that's a big job too, by the way. So we need the motion then to reduce the rear west setback for the shed from 20 feet to 4 feet. And Commissioner Garland, you want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, and a second. Commissioner Pittman, seconds. Commissioner Garland.
Yeah, I think for all the reasons that have been discussed regarding the standards, I think this one applies as well. I think the reconfiguration of the car wash to make it smaller, I think the original request was at the property line. This is now 4 feet off the property line. And I think given the kind of the uniqueness of the positioning of the car wash and where that shed needs to be, there's a bit of a plight and that it would be there and still enable the lot flow and the ingress egress out of the lot. I think it works well, and I think that this standard has been met. We've got a car wash here as it relates to standard number 2. We have a car wash here in place already. I don't believe that it will alter the essential character of the neighborhood, and I believe that based on Commissioner Snyder's earlier comments regarding the investment that would be needed to update this, this is badly needs to be updated, and to generate the type of return for the owner, these type of investments need to be made. So I would propose to approve this variance.
Okay, Commissioner Pittman.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Garland. I do believe that the conditions have been met. I'd also say that, this shed is the closest adjacent property to this is, parking is abutting where this shed is. So it's not infringing on anybody's views or causing any issues. Cars are parking up and facing it. So I don't see any issues with granting this.
Thank you. And it's going to be a new shed, this is good news too. So any other commissioner have any comments on this? All right, now we can take the roll on this one.
Commissioner Garland?
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman?
Yes.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway?
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy?
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder?
Yes.
Chair Rose?
Yes, thank you. Those variations are approved then. Now I'll throttle back my eagerness and we will go back to, can I get a motion to, under the conditional use for the restaurant, to reduce the parking requirements from 37 slots to 28 slots, a reduction of 24%. Can I get a motion to approve that and a second? Commissioner Burns moves, and can I get a second on that? Commissioner Callaway seconds. Commissioner Burns.
Okay, so we're looking at the parking reduction. This has been a property that's been in use for quite a long time, and the parking situation, I believe, is mitigated by the type of use. The architectural layout seems to be satisfactory. So based on that, I would advocate that we approve this variation.
All right, Commissioner Callaway?
I don't have anything further to add.
Okie dokie. So we are saying that it meets all three of the conditions for variance. Okay. Eileen, can you call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner Garland,
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. So we would approve that variation. The next variation is to reduce the front setback. It's on the east side of the property in order to accommodate the addition. And that setback will be reduced from 40 feet to 27.58 feet, which is a reduction of 31%. So can I get a motion to approve and a second for this variation? Commissioner Garland moves, Commissioner Snyder seconds.
Are you ready, Chair Rose?
Oh, Commissioner Garland, you have the floor, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Or the screen, as it's called. You have the screen.
The unique circumstance here, and while I don't believe that there's a tremendously unique circumstance, I would submit that they are using this as a patio anyway, and so there is some sort of setback there and defined area that's already existing today that they're just looking to enclose, and so I would submit that this standard has been met, and I don't believe that the essential character of the neighborhood is altered in any way, and I believe that the investments that are being made here combined in the property, but particularly in Yorkies, I think will only serve to enhance the returns for the owner and the applicant. So I would approve these standards for this variation, I should say. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Snyder.
Thank you. I completely agree with Commissioner Garland and really don't have anything further to add other than I'll be supporting it.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I would say the only thing that's going to be altered is I'll miss those beautiful little planter boxes where they grew basil and other beautiful herbs. So maybe you could like doll that up again. That's the essential character of that. So I would strongly support this as well, that the standards have been met for this variation. Eileen, would you, Commissioner Burns?
Just one thing, maybe we can just, I'll register this as something put on the back burner for when we get into discussions of the zoning ordinance someday, when we're looking at the new ordinance. And that would be to consider what the planning philosophy is for a 40-foot setback along York Road. I know it's very customary to have various kinds of setbacks on major corridors. But for example, the new Edward Elmhurst Medical Building that's on the east side of York, seems like they're right up to the lot line. I don't know if it's exactly the same zoning class, but regardless of that, just from a land use perspective, there's a building with a solid brick wall or masonry wall right up to the street practically. So I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent, just something to think about when we get to that point.
I don't disagree with you, Commissioner Burns, but I can give you some reasons why that 40-foot setback is there. Pulling out into traffic where you can't see, if you have a solid thing, that traffic on York Road goes pretty fast. So I think when we do consider this, we need to look at what really is reasonable. 40 feet may not be reasonable, but building right up to that line in a street that has that level of fast-moving traffic may be an issue as well. So I don't disagree with you that we should look at it for sure. Okay, shall we call the roll? Did we call the roll on this one? I think you need to call the roll, Eileen.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. Thank you. That variation is approved. The last variation, and I believe I'm correct in this, is a request to reduce the interior side setback for the addition from 10 feet to 4.75 feet. This is on the south side. Keep in mind, this is on that side where those 3 lanes of traffic are. In fact, it will help Max be able to create that at that point. So can I have a motion to approve and a second? Commissioner Burns moves. Commissioner Pittman, do you want to make a second on that one? Second. Commissioner Burns.
I think in this case, the request or the reduction is very largely mitigated by the fact that the lot line between the Yorkies and the car wash separates it's the same owner on both sides. Whether it's, to the invisible lot line that the passerby might not see, it's 4.75 feet, but to a casual observer, it would look like a lot more. So I understand the need to do this because of the establishment of lot lines for these parcels, but I believe that it really doesn't have much effect. Obviously, the unique circumstance, again, is this whole constellation of changes they're making to improve the site and the buildings, the use of the buildings on the site. I don't believe it will have any impact on nearby properties, and it helps them to achieve a reasonable return.
Commissioner Pittman.
I agree with Commissioner Burns. I think this is sort of a non-issue because of the fact that you've got 2 properties together by the same owner, and it's all being developed again together. To your point, this really could fit under something that would make more sense with a PUD because it is being developed almost as a whole, even though it's 2 separate uses. So I don't have any issues. I think the standards are definitely met to accommodate this request.
Thank you. I guess I have a question for city staff. If the applicant had come and had consolidated these 2 lots, would things have been a little easier, clearer for them? Eileen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we still would have had to do 2 conditional use permits. It may have changed some of the variations a little bit, but there still would have been some relief. Yeah.
Okay. But that does raise, sometimes it might be valuable for us to say to an applicant, maybe you want to put these together before you come. If you own both those pieces of property to consolidate, then there might, if we thought there was some advantage to that, but right, we would still need the 2 conditional uses. So speaking of which, we have these 2 motions on the floor then. Yeah, Eileen?
We still need to vote on the interior side yard.
I'm just running to go. Would you please call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy.
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. Okay. Now let's return to the first conditional use. I'm going to take the car wash itself first, and that motion to approve the conditional use was made by Commissioner Burns. Commissioner Uditsky seconded it. Let me just ask, as a matter of protocol, do we need to, since Commissioner Uditsky is not here, do we need another commissioner to second that?
I think we do.
I think so too. Commissioner Pittman agrees to do that, so she seconds that. So, Commissioner Burns, do you want to look at the conditional use itself?
Sure. Let me just queue up. Okay. So we're doing the car wash first.
Correct.
Okay, the 7 standards for conditional use are: first, establishment, maintenance, or operation of the conditional use will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. I believe that standard is met. Second, the conditional use will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate area, in the immediate vicinity for the purposes already permitted, nor substantially diminish and impair property values within the neighborhood. I believe that's clearly met. Third, the establishment of the conditional use will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of the surrounding property for uses permitted in the district, and it will not. So it does meet that standard. Fourth, adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and/or necessary facilities have been or are being provided. Most of this is already in place, and the city will require through the permit process that they provide these adequate elements. So that is met. Fifth, adequate measures have been or will be taken to provide ingress and egress so designed as to minimize traffic congestion in the public streets. So now we're talking about how the property interacts with the public streets, and I think the design has been shown to be adequate and suitable for the uses they've proposed. So that's standard is met. Sixth, the proposed conditional use is not contrary to the objectives of the current comprehensive plan for the city of Elmhurst. I think this was illustrated in the staff report. This standard is met. And seventh and last, the conditional use shall in all other respects conform to the applicable regulations of the district in which it is located, except as such regulations may in each instance be modified pursuant to the recommendations of the commission. And in this case, I believe the 3 variations that apply to the car wash have been approved, and that would be part of the context of the 7th conditional use standard, which therefore I believe is met.
Thank you. Commissioner Pittman.
I think Commissioner Burns pretty much covered everything. We've got a conditional use permit request for a property that currently has a self-serve car wash on it. We are getting a newer, better, more modern car wash, and they've addressed all of the standards within their application, and I think we should approve it.
Thank you. Anyone else? I just want to add that the first 3 conditions, standards for conditional use, I think are met because we're just trading out one car wash for the other. So it's already a car wash, so it's going to be I think those are met for those reasons as well. Any other comments? All right, I'm going to ask Eileen to please call the roll.
Thank you. Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman.
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway.
Yes.
Commissioner Garland.
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy.
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder.
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes. That conditional use is approved. The second motion we have, quote, on the table is the conditional use application for the restaurant. And that motion was made by Commissioner Burns and seconded by Commissioner Garland. So I'm going to ask Commissioner Burns to start this.
Thank you, Chair Rose. So for the 7 standards that we just went through for the car wash, I believe they're all met for the restaurant, and largely for the reason that Chair Rose just mentioned with the car wash. This is a restaurant. It already has the pickup window, and so the general concept of people driving around the building and getting their food from their car is already there. So this will not obviously change anything with respect to public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare from the status quo. So that standard is met. Standard 2, that would not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the vicinity or substantially diminish and impair property values in the neighborhood is met. The conditional use will not impede normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding property. that's met. Adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, necessary facilities have been or are being provided. I believe that's met for the same reasons I mentioned for the car wash. The adequate measures will be taken, have been or will be taken to provide ingress and egress designed to minimize traffic congestion in the public streets. And that is met. We saw the drawings and actually I'm thinking this again is like a kind of like a PUD since it's all integrated together. The conditional use is not contrary to the objectives of the current comprehensive plan. That's met. And in all other respects, the conditional use shall conform to the applicable regulations of the district in which it's located, except as such regulations may be modified pursuant to the recommendation of the commission. And we had 3 variations for the restaurant, which we also voted on and approved and become part of the context of this standard, which is met. So I believe all the standards are met for this conditional use.
Thank you. Commissioner Garland.
Well done, Commissioner Burns. I really don't have anything to add. The only thing I would say was that I appreciate the applicant's flexibility as it related to some of the lot flow challenges that I think we recognized early on. The configuration of the striping and the angled parking for the restaurant, the 3 lanes that were put in place, you know, to help kind of satisfy any of the concerns by the commission as far as some of the egress out of the drive-through lane or the car wash. And then I think the consolidation of the egress, some egress points out onto York, I think only served to kind of improve and make it more, the ingress and egress points more intuitive. So I would support it.
Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? Okay. Eileen, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Garland,
Yes.
Commissioner Callaway,
Yes.
Commissioner McCoy,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes, that is approved. I want to say to the applicant, echo some of Commissioner Garland's words here. Thank you for your flexibility. This is a long-term business in Elmhurst. Many of you may or may not know that it started as a way for York High School to provide an experience for students to learn how to run a business, work in a business. So it may be almost 50 years old, and it has done nothing but get better. You'll see the iterations of it. I've seen it from when it was a little bitty place to constant improvement over and over. And I think this is just the latest step in this particular business owner making this, improving their business. And that's probably, I think, one of the reasons for their longevity is anyone who's ever owned this has been dedicated to really improving this business. So I really thank you for that. And for your patience with this commission as we worked through this. It may have seemed to you that it's taken a long time, but I'll tell you one of the results you've gotten here is unanimous approval from every commissioner, and that's worth a lot. So
I thank all of you guys, and we hope that we make both of these properties even better than they already are. And we're looking forward to making that happen. So
you've got a great business, and we wish you all the best. So
thank you so much.
Moves on to the Development Planning and Zoning Committee. Eileen, is that where it moves next?
Yes, it will move there next, most likely the 28th.
Right. So our hope is that because we've spent so much time, they won't need to, and you'll be able to move forward. So good luck to you.
I hope so. Thank you so much.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Okay. Our next item of business is really, this is a discussion, and I'm going to let Eileen lead it. She's got some material for us to talk. We have been working with this new plan unit development process for almost 2 years. And we've had, I talked about this with Eileen earlier, 9 cases. it seemed for a while that every case we were doing was another PUD, and we worked our way through it. But we've always been committed to the idea of, after we use this for a while, what kind of changes do we see really need to occur? We've now gone through 9 cases, I think some of which it's not so simple as to say, oh, they shouldn't have been a PUD. It's more, what did we gain from there being a PUD, and what did we lose from that? And I would say the same thing about cases that we might have thought, that one we just talked about, that maybe should have been a PUD. What would have been the advantages to that, and what would have been the disadvantages? So initially, I thought of this as kind of type 1 versus type 2 error, that we were including more cases than really our net was too broad and we were including too many, versus our net was very narrow and we were excluding ones that should have been. I don't think about it that way. I now think about it as kind of what do we gain and what do we not gain? What do we lose by using this particular model for a PUD, and how it might be modified? So I'm going to hand it over to Eileen. You've got a PowerPoint you want to show us?
I do, and Emily's going to pull it up and share the screen, because even though we've been doing Zoom for over a year, I still struggle with the screen sharing. So actually, one correction, Susan, after we talked about it earlier, we realized we actually have 10 PUDs that we've done, not 9. We were missing one, the townhomes on Addison. And also on the screen, I have that there's 2 pending. There actually is a 3rd pending. And by pending, I mean they've had at least one of their pre-meetings, not necessarily have filed the cases. And I'll talk about each of those a little bit farther along in the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint is brief, and it's really just to get the discussion started. We have a couple suggestions, but we're really looking for your feedback tonight on your suggestions and what the commission thinks. And we'll probably also take your feedback to the Development Planning and Zoning Committee and get some feedback from them, and then be back before you with additional recommendations as we move forward.
And
so if Emily,
before you go much further, I also want to say that I've had some discussion with Mayor Scott Levin, our new mayor, recently, and I think this is a concern of his, since he was on DPZ for a while as we prowled through this. Is this, how are we doing with this? So he has some interest in supporting our looking at this and making modifications. So
yes, he does. So this next slide here is just the intent and purpose. And I just put a couple of the phrases in bold. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but alternative zoning procedure under which land can be developed or redeveloped with innovation, imagination, and creative architectural design, allowing people to depart from strict application of the use and bulk regulations. And then on this next slide, there are 8 purposes of the plan development. And again, I'm not going to read through all these, but we can just leave it up for a moment for everyone to kind of refresh themselves with these items.
Eileen, will you also be providing a copy of this PowerPoint to us?
I can, yes.
I think that'd be helpful for everybody.
Yep. So, I mean, really one of the main things with a PUD is to find creative ways for a project to move forward, and to, situations where a property might have split zoning, or you might be adding multiple buildings to a property. So, for example, the Yorkies case probably would have been an appropriate plan development. Emily, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So I broke the plan developments down into a couple different categories. So we've had 5 industrial plan developments. The project at Lake and Grand, 940 North Weigel, which was our first one back in 2020, pre-pandemic, one of our last in-person meetings. McMaster Carr, 837 Riverside Drive, and 545 Lamont. So of these plan developments, every one of those is over 2 acres, which is why they needed to go through the plan development. The project at Lake and Grand and the project on Riverside Drive prior to the plan development ordinance could have been built by right without coming before the commission. Weigel Drive would have had to come before the commission for sign variations, and McMaster Carr would have needed a conditional use permit for height, and Lamont Road would have needed a variation for height because they triggered sort of a different section of the industrial district. So of the 5 industrial plan unit developments, 2 of them would have been built by right prior to the adoption of the code. You know, these, I think the industrial ones are pretty impactful projects. And even though, you know, those Lake and Grand and Riverside Drive would have met all of our zoning requirements, given their location, we think it was beneficial that they went through the plan development process, especially Riverside Drive. We were able to work with the applicant on that for the potential road dedication and the intersection improvements. And yes, those are things that maybe we could have worked through in a regular building permit, but I think the plan development got everyone working together on it earlier in the process. For some of these, you know, we would not, if someone is just submitting a building permit, we might not require a traffic study. So I think these are all pretty large, impactful developments. And I think the plan development was helpful for everyone to get to take a look at these. And even from just our internal staff review, which we're trying to work through as well, it got everyone in the room earlier as opposed to someone submitting a building permit for one of these and, you know, it not being looked at as cohesively.
So it was size. In these, Eileen, I just want to clarify then, it was size that keyed off the requirement that they
correct.
Be considered
Correct.
PUDs.
Yep. So then the next group are what I'm calling like the institutional plan developments. And again, these were all due to size. So Lincoln School, I mean, that's a full demolition of an existing school and rebuild. Timothy Christian was an addition. City View Church was an addition. Elmhurst University was just sort of a reconfiguration of the parking lot. So all of these, with the exception of Elmhurst University, would have needed a conditional use permit. Lincoln and Timothy Christian also would have needed variations. So you would have seen these cases without the plan development process in place. So, you know, it's interesting. I know that during the City View Church process, there was some neighbor interaction, and the church was able to work with the neighbor on a stormwater issue that was unrelated to the request, but came up due to the neighbor meeting, and that was, you know, a benefit of this process. So it's hard to know if, you know, some of the if that would have happened with just a conditional use permit. And even for City View's request, you know, we even, as we go through the zoning ordinance, want to kind of look at our conditional use permit and what would trigger an amended conditional use permit, because their request really was just to provide some additional accessibility at the church and a small addition so they could add an elevator. Timothy Christian was a larger addition, I think 1 or 2 classrooms. So, you know, these, they would have had to go through a zoning process should they have gone through the entire plan development process, since they were all existing uses. That's just something for us to discuss and kind of see what we come up with. And then this next one is a residential plan development. And so this is the townhomes on Addison, those 6 townhomes at Addison and North Avenue that we had last summer. And these were not, the plan development was not triggered for this one due to acreage. It was due to having more than 75 feet of frontage in the outer core residential district. So that is why the townhomes on Addison had to go through the plan development process. And then we have, like I said, we have 3, you know, pending, not officially filed. Could you go to the next slide, Emily? So the first one is We have a gentleman applying for townhomes at 231 North Larch. That is neighborhood transition district. Townhomes are permitted by right, and that property is exactly 75 feet of frontage. So if he was a foot shorter, he would not be coming through the plan development process. He had his staff meeting, he had his meeting before DPZ, and he's having his neighborhood meeting shortly. So these are townhomes that will be directly north of those 4 townhomes at the corner of 3rd and Larch. Then the next one is King Transmission is putting a small addition on the back of their property. They may need a parking variation because of the way we calculate our parking for auto repair, which is something we're going to need to look at in the zoning ordinance as well. Otherwise, they're only moving forward. They would only be moving forward for a PUD due to the size of the property. And then we have a proposed development at First and Haven, where the applicants have had their neighborhood meeting already. They have not come before DPZ. They have not filed, but this is a proposed condo building. It has split zoning. It's a larger development in the outer core residential and outer core district. And this type of development is probably one of the reasons that the plan development ordinance was adopted in the first place. I mean, you have the complication of the split zoning. It's in a high profile area right in our downtown. So that's something that would be moving, will be moving forward probably in the next couple months. To go back to 231 Larch, the neighborhood transition district was established for these types of townhome developments. So we've been talking amongst ourselves, should someone really have to go through a plan development to do something like that is permitted by right, and why we made that change to the zoning ordinance. Maybe the neighborhood transition district shouldn't be included in that 75-foot frontage trigger. So Emily, if you could go to the next slide. So up on the screen here are the requirements for mandatory plan developments. And the one in bold is all development greater than 2 acres, except for single family detached developments. So this is that second standard is the reason we've had 9 of the 10 PUDs that have gone through the process. And then we've just had the one on Addison that had to go through it for 75 feet of frontage. And Addison is outer core residential. It is not neighborhood transition. It divides between Addison and Larch. So when we were working on the plan development ordinance, when we were talking about the requirements and the different triggers, we looked in our definition section and found that we had a definition of development, which is up on the screen now. So this was a definition that existed in the definition section of the zoning ordinance. And that was what we used to define, development over 2 acres, development on properties more than 75 feet of frontage. So you'll see it's pretty broad. Land disturbance, extension of use of the land, structured alteration, relocation, enlargement of any structure, construction, reconstruction. So it's a pretty broad definition. So we came up with a couple recommendations that we're just making these recommendations at this point to get the conversation started for tonight. So the first one, for that first trigger of the 75 feet of frontage, could you switch, please? Thank you. So the new text is in bold, and there's a strike through of what we would be potentially removing. So removing development and changing it to any newly constructed building or an addition that increases the floor area ratio by more than 50%. And then also striking through that neighborhood transition district. So no longer we need to keep that definition of development in the zoning ordinance, but not use it in this particular section, and then base it on the size of an addition or a new building. And then the next slide, this would be to use that same requirements of a newly constructed building or an addition that increases the floor area ratio by more than 50%, and then increasing it to 5 acres. And here is something that we want to talk about with the commission. You know, previously we used to, before we had the new plan development ordinance, plan developments were listed in the zoning districts and they had different minimum lot area requirements. So we were wondering if maybe it should be based on, you know, residentially zoned properties have a certain acreage, commercial properties have a certain acreage, and industrial properties have a certain acreage. And, you know, part of the reason we were thinking of increasing the industrial is we have had a couple situations where we've been approached by some of our existing businesses in the industrial park who've wanted to put an addition on. And they, because they're maybe 2.5, 3 acres, they would have to go through a plan development to put an addition on that might not be that significant and would meet all of our code requirements. And I don't know that that was really the intent of the plan development ordinance when it was adopted, to impact our existing businesses who are just trying to, you know, expand slightly.
Eileen, of the 5 industrial PUDs we've had so far, if this were adopted, okay, how many of those would still be a PUD?
All of them.
All of them still?
All of them still would be.
They were all at least 5 acres.
Yep.
Okay.
And even, you know, all of them were either a newly constructed building or the McMaster car. I mean, I suppose I would have to check it, but that was a pretty significant addition, but it was definitely over 5 acres.
Can you go back to the previous slide? I'm going to go, all right, this one here. So the changes, any newly constructed building or an addition that increases the FAR by more than 50% on a greater than 5 acres. So you have to have all of these 3 elements: newly constructed, that'd be one, or an addition, and it has to be over 5 acres.
Correct.
That's what you're suggesting. Okay.
So then the next, also we need to talk to the attorney about this. We're not sure if it's even something that we could do, but possibly add an appeal process. We already have an appeal section in the zoning ordinance where someone can appeal my decision, or, you know, like a zoning administrator decision to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I don't think we've had one in a very, very long time, but that's something we thought we could consider adding to the plan development ordinance as well. Maybe if we make some other changes to these triggers, it's not something that would be requested very often, but we still need to talk to the city attorney about it. And it would have this caveat that the underlying zoning requirements for the district would have to be met. And then the next slide, we just have some sort of like cleanup items. You know, we want to, right now there's not an order for the pre-meetings, and we think it's beneficial for an applicant to have their pre-meeting before they meet with the DPZ. So change the code to require that. We think the relationship between site development allowances and the modification standards that they need to be met could be better explained in the ordinance as well. Requiring some additional information for both preliminary architectural and preliminary engineering. We've had a couple situations where, you know, we measure height from grade, and you know, the finished floor, the grade might change slightly, and people showed it from the finished floor. So just making sure that we have clear instructions and information in the ordinance of what we really need and what our engineers need to do a preliminary review, you know, maybe additional information on grades and that kind of stuff. So we're going to work with our city engineer and public works director to talk through some of those things. And then the last slide is just some questions that we have for the commission. You know, substantial conformance. It's there's really not a definition for that right now. Would that be beneficial? Right now, when someone comes back with a final PUD, we just treat it as a public meeting, and it's not something that's reposted and published, and wondering on your feedback on that. and if there should be any additional discretion for staff in the major minor modifications. So that's, just a starting point. And if you want, we can kind of go back and go through some of the items I spoke about, or if there's another way you want to handle this discussion, Chair Rose, we're open to that.
Thanks, that's really helpful information. What I'm going to suggest is that let's have some broad questions about this, but this is a lot of information, and that I personally want to look at this and think through, and that we have a subsequent discussion really on this as well. So this is not the only time we will be talking about this. So I always think it's a good idea to kind of clarify stuff first, questions we've got about it, broad issues, and then, we'll have a subsequent meeting, I think, to go do a little deeper dive into that. So thoughts, questions, comments, a lot of stuff. So Commissioner Burns and then Commissioner McCoy.
Sure. I think one thing this brings up, because we're talking about what is the gradient that takes us from just our zoning ordinance, which is just a bit, it's really a bunch of templates depending on what district you're in, to the planned unit development. And this kind of reminds me of what somebody who worked in an assessor's office once told me. They said, the assessor uses a shotgun and the appraiser uses a rifle. In other words, for general zoning, if you have generic property, you're going to build a house. Well, we can have a template for any lot in the city that's zoned R1, R2. You're going to build a house that's going to have these setbacks. It's going to have so much lot coverage, so much impervious, stormwater mitigation, et cetera, et cetera. And that could work for all kinds of different developments. But then we get these developments that are really more impactful, and they're not cookie cutter. And we want to know, what are you going to do? And even if they could develop by right, just the bulk of the development is something that we really want the applicant to come before us so we can flesh it all out. And because you have these larger properties that are not just cookie cutter, then you can say, well, we really don't need the formal template of the bulk standards, et cetera, of the zoning ordinance. We can just look at this based on the actual substantive concepts that are part of the planned unit development standards. It's interesting that some of the standards in the conditional use section, the 7 standard conditional uses, sort of emerge again in the PUD standards, but they're a little different. For example, one of the conditional use standards is whether there's adequate ingress and egress to public streets. There's a corresponding standard for the PUD, but it also says and circulation on the site. So it's not just what happens off this, we're looking at the whole thing. And if we had a PUD for Yorkies, that would have been maybe a different way to look at it. But anyway, just my thought is, do we have templates that serve a lot of purposes, but sometimes we need this unique way to look at certain projects.
Thanks for your thoughts. Commissioner McCoy.
I guess my question may sound silly, but how do you decide what the best interests of the city is? I mean, who makes that decision? Maybe I'm not expressing it correctly, but who decides what's the best interest of the city? Is it the developers, the city, the people that live in the city, the businesses? I mean, who decides what's the best interest? Does there have to be a little more definition or clarification of what that means?
Eileen?
So, I mean, I think that really is sort of a policy decision. In the end, I mean, any recommendations that, staff makes and the commission makes ultimately will have to be up to the city council. But, initially when we were having some of these industrial developments, the first few that we had that we realized needed to be a planned development, a couple of them we were sort of surprised that we were like, gosh, this normally they could have just built this building and it would have just gone through building and engineering and they would have met our codes and it, would have gone through the process. But some of these, my personal opinion is that some of these industrial buildings are pretty impactful to the neighborhood and the street infrastructure and everything, and that they should go through the process. So I guess everyone is going to have their own opinion on what's impactful to the neighborhood, and all of ours tonight might differ on certain projects. But I personally think these larger ones are impactful, and but ultimately it'll be a policy decision that the council will make on what they want to keep as needing a plan development and what may not. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I think also that the way the plan development is set up is that it gets all those stakeholders involved sooner.
Yeah.
So everybody's got a part in it. It's not just the public, it's not just staff, it's not just city council, it's everybody sooner in the process. And I think that's what's been helpful in the ones that we think should have been with your PUD. It gets that public input. I mean, an example was McMaster Carr. Remember that one? They did a lot of things to appease that neighborhood, and they found out about a lot of those things when they did a public meeting, where they wouldn't have known about that early in the process. Otherwise, they would have came for a conditional use permit and a strict public hearing right off the start. So it got everybody at the table quicker than it normally would have. So things can be, adjusted prior to it even going for application.
Yeah, and I think that's a big plus. I personally think I would be cautious to not make a change where we would lose that requirement for, the kind of neighborhood pre-meeting. We'd think really clear, very clearly before we said, well, we don't need that, because that's such a plus here. And I think of other things that have come before the commission that if that had happened, things would have been a whole lot better. They just would have been a whole lot better. So that's the balance I see between that's a plus. And Commissioner Burns, I got to say, if I could high five you and I, we got the plaque for Carl Sandburg from City View Church. They're going to put that in, aren't they? All right, so Carl Sandburg is alive. Here we go. Oh, I'm with you on that. So, other thoughts, comments on this? Commissioner Pittman, and then Commissioner Garland.
I guess my comment after seeing the presentation and Eileen, your comments, it seems to me that while there are going to be a couple of cases that come through that we all might agree, well, maybe this shouldn't have come through, and maybe it would have been fine if they had just come through for conditional use, or it really should have just qualified on its own. I think those are probably going to be few and far between. And it seems, based on your feedback, that the benefit far outweighs the benefit of seeing more projects and having a lot of hands on those projects far outweighs some of these that come through that maybe really didn't need to be looked at as closely as they have to be under the PUD. You mentioned the traffic reports. You mentioned that it seems that, it's your belief that it might promote a greater deal of partnership with some of the developers, that they might be a little bit more motivated to work through some problems with city staff, with neighbors. I think those are big benefits. I think that even if there's a couple projects a year that we see, seem to be more onerous than they need to be, I think that's probably okay. That's just my opinion.
Good point. Commissioner Garland.
Yeah, and I think just to add on Commissioner Pittman's comments, I think that to have a few more come through it's not going to hurt the process, or I believe that the outcomes that we're seeing come out of these PUDs and the engagement that's required throughout, I think, to make it better projects. It's far more collaborative, and so my sense is that as we look at the PUDs that have come forward, there's nothing that's been just really glaring that would suggest that, hey, that shouldn't have been a PUD. Although having said that, I do like putting some sort of materiality level on the expansion of the FAR in there, whether that's 50 or not. 50 seems like a lot just as an initial reaction, but I think that it may be worthy of having some more discussion. But I think that that's something that could and probably should be entertained here. But as we went through this and we kind of put this in place, it really wasn't quite sure how this was going to go. Okay, and I think that the city staff has done a remarkable job in helping to kind of usher these things through, and they have been, and not knowing how deliberations would go, and the PUDs, I believe, and the structure and just how robust the structure is around the PUDs, I think they just make for really good projects and better projects as a result of that input. So I'm not opposed to, back to Commissioner Snyder's comments, that if a couple of them slip through, I still think that we're going to be better off having those couple slip through versus the other way.
Thank you. Which really raises for me, so could you articulate what really unnecessary burdens would be put on someone on a project by having it be a PUD? Would that be money, time, whatever? What are, if we would say, oh, that shouldn't have been, what would some of those burdens be by being too inclusive?
Probably the biggest thing is time for people and having to go through the process, especially if they were, meeting all of our other requirements. Money as well. Some of the additional application requirements may not be required for a variation or even a conditional use permit, depending on what it is. Like, for example, that the first one we had on Weigel Drive, their variations that they asked for were for signs. So if someone came in for sign variations, we wouldn't say you need a traffic study. You wouldn't need to, submit all of your engineering up front with that variation. So it's, there is the preliminary and the final, though, where people don't have to do their whole final construction documents. So that helps people save money, the preliminary, breaking it down into the preliminary and final. But from something that normally would be by right or like a sign variation or a parking variation, something that's not encompassing the whole project, it could increase the cost for them as well.
Time doesn't bother me. If it takes someone more time, that just doesn't bother me all that much. But money, I'm concerned about that. Like, could you estimate, or before we talk about this again, what the range of additional costs have been for people? Let's just, if it shouldn't have been a PUD, how much extra did that cost them? Because I think we ought to consider, I think that's fair to consider that. You can say, well, look, most of these are big projects. This is penny ante stuff or, this, but, money's money. And if we are charging people more where it wouldn't have been, I'd be curious about that. I'm just curious about that. So get an idea how much more that would cost. So, Commissioner Snyder.
Thank you. Yes, this entire plan unit development process, I think, really brings an additional layer of transparency and engagement that provides a really great public benefit. And Eileen, I really appreciate hearing you talk about impact and what that means to the community, to neighbors. And I really think that is one of the biggest pieces that this plan unit development process allows us to engage with and address. So I really appreciate that angle. I'm curious if you've had any feedback from the applicants themselves who've gone through the process as to whether or not they have felt it has been a benefit to them, and if it's helped them come out with on the other end with an improved project, or what kind of feedback have you gotten from the applicants?
I don't think we've really had any negative feedback from the applicants. I know we did have some comments from one applicant about the timing that it took for a particular project. One thing I will say is we have had a couple dealings with people with potential projects who've scaled it back or just done like a very minor facade change to not have to go through the process. So we have had a couple people do something different rather than go through the process.
Because
but both of those were
needing to go through it, or because of time, or did they
time. I think time. But both of those situations that I'm thinking of were for like existing uses where they were maybe going to change like the look of the structure more and chose not to. But, you know, I know one of the applicants was very happy with our process. He thought ours was better than some of the other communities that he's worked in, but I can try and get some additional feedback from them as well. Some of the more recent cases on how we compare to other communities and that information.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol. Go ahead.
Well, if you were going to ask a question along the same vein, I was going to switch gears, but I'm just curious how, and maybe I missed this, but how did you come up with the 5 acres as opposed to the 2 acres? Why not 4 acres or 3 acres?
It was really just a point of discussion to start the conversation with all of you. I know we did at one point look at the industrial park, and we have we have a handful, I think, of like 1 and 2 acre properties in the industrial park. And we have had a couple situations where people have wanted to do an addition to an existing building that would have been under 5 acres, but we're open to other acreages there.
Okay, so yeah, I was just wondering, and I think you just answered this, how many properties in the industrial areas wouldn't fall into that, and you think it's just a handful?
We can check that too. We can have our GIS tech take a look at that and get kind of a number there.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to follow up, Commissioner Pittman, before you go, which is, in some way, it's a little disturbing to hear that in order to avoid the PUD project, people didn't make alterations to a project. Those might have been great alterations, but they didn't want to do it this time. So it'd be very curious to me what we're losing by continuing the PUD thing. Was someone going to do some really interesting thing to a building and then like, that's too long a process, I don't want to move forward with that. So any ideas you have, even anecdotal information on that would be it'd be interesting to me. We get an idea what we lose and what we gain from that. So Commissioner Pittman.
Yeah, I just had 2 things. One was that I think time is an important thing to look at, because when you're looking at developing something, time is money. So, putting together drawings, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, but months and months of delay could be tens of thousands of dollars a month of just your property sitting there. So I do think time is a very big chunk of things, and that you could get some genuine feedback from people that, hey, we don't have the time to sit on this because of the cost of just sitting on and waiting. If it's going to take 4 or 5 months to get through the PUD process, they might look at doing something else. So I guess I just add that, being on the other side of things, time is very important. Also, I think you mentioned, and excuse me if I misunderstood, but using different size metrics for different land uses. Yes. I think that's a great idea too. Obviously, industrial properties are going to be larger by nature. Having a larger threshold there, and then obviously working back down for the other uses, I think that's a really good idea.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Garland.
Yeah, I guess then I would add also, the materiality of the change. And so I know we talked about the FAR, but if you're sitting on what would otherwise be a PUD site, I think just the materiality of what they're looking to do. I mean, and that, I know that's a bit nuanced, but and maybe this is where the appeals element kind of comes in, where they can come through and go through, a really short process to, appeal to, whether it's the city or to the, the zoning group commission to forego the PUD. I don't know, but I just kind of throw that out there and just as a kind of free forming right now. So
that's a really good point too. It's a very good point. I mean, it's complicated. So, other thoughts? Okay, Commissioner Burns.
And sort of along those same lines, I'm thinking that the 50% criterion for the FAR increase. So, you know, if you've got a 2,500 foot property and they say we're going to add 2,000 square feet, okay, that's a big addition relative to the size of the original property. If you've got a 500,000 foot building and they say we're going to add 40% to that, that's 200,000 feet, but it would fall under the 50% criterion. Yeah. So maybe there should be not only a percentage, but also just an aggregate square footage. And as Commissioner Pittman said, maybe it would depend on the class of property.
Yeah, that's the devil of percentages, isn't it? You know, it's like, oh, well, that's not much, you know, or that's massive. You know, if you've got a big project, it's massive. If you don't have a big project, yeah, it's.
Sure, I'll take 1% of Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, you know, I'd take even less than that, Kevin. So, okay. Any other thoughts? I mean, I think this is really helpful just kind of initially to get that. And then I really want to look forward to digesting some of the ideas that you've presented, Eileen, and think that through for different information. So here's my question. You're going to send us that PowerPoint. As we look through that, and we might want to send you questions.
Okay.
And then you can, we'll send, if you send a question about this, I'm going to suggest you send it. This is one of the few times I'm going to suggest it should be sent as a group email. Include everyone in the commission. Could we do that, Eileen?
You would still. I would recommend you send it to me, and then I will send it out to the commission.
Sends it out to the commission. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Some way where that everybody gets the advantage of that information. Yep. So if you've got a question to Eileen, and then she'll answer that, and everybody gets the answer to that, or gets the advantage of that. And then we're going to come together and kind of think this through again. So okay.
We can put it on the agenda for the next meeting, yeah. Which won't be until July 20th. We're not going to be meeting the 4th of July week.
Oh, okay. So we'll get a little patriotic push in there before we have to do it again. Okay. Can you give us an idea about the schedule for the rest of the summer? What our thinking is right now? It may change, but.
Yes, may change. But right now we are expecting to have 2 PUDs on July 20th. One for King Transmission and then one for those townhomes on Larch. And I think those are the only 2 cases that we are expecting in July that could change. And then we don't know when that additional PUD at First and Haven will be coming forward. That's probably going to be a little bit longer. You know, we get calls periodically about different smaller residential variations. So I wouldn't be surprised if something, you know, a fence came up or an addition or something like that. But we're kind of caught up, and I like after our really busy catch up from 2020.
Yeah, I appreciate you sent out the list of cases from 2020 and 2021, and I was impressed with the volume of work that we've done recently. It's really been a lot. First of all, there's been a lot of activity going on in Elmhurst itself. Lots of building, improving, a lot of that stuff, and that we really have done a pretty great job in moving a lot of this through. So kudos to everybody for that one. So, Commissioner Pittman.
Just a random question for Eileen. Eileen, when you were talking about First and Haven, you mentioned it was condos. Is that condos or apartments?
Sorry, it's apartments. If I said condos, I misspoke. Apartments.
Okay, I was just curious because I thought it was apartments. Okay, thanks.
And that's generated lots and lots of discussion, and will generate even more before it even ever gets to us. I think it will, so, or to fruition. So, Kevin.
Just a sort of off the wall comment. It's really not related to the PUD, but it might be related to something we might have on our plate someday. So very recently, it might have just been the last week or so, there was news that the state is indeed going to enforce the requirement for at least home rule municipalities, maybe all municipalities, to develop an affordable housing plan. Now, as far as I can see, there's no enforcement. I mean, they can say you have to have the plan, but there's no enforcement to actually implementing the plan. But this talk about PUD and things being triggered made me think of appraisals I've done in the city of Chicago, where they have the what they call the ARO, the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, which is very highly fleshed out. If you get zoning relief, you have to abide by the ARO. You have to provide affordable housing units on site. You can buy out some of them, but you still have to do on site, and so on and so forth. Now, I realize that it would be the city council ultimately whose bailiwick it would be to get into this affordable housing thing. But would we have any dealing with that at some point?
I mean, I would say potentially, depending on how the city council would move forward with something like that.
Yeah. And they've already started kind of training around it, haven't they? They've been getting some
that was fair housing. That was fair housing.
Fair housing.
Last night, there was a fair housing educational thing. It's on YouTube. Everybody's interested in watching it. But the affordable housing, yeah, it's one of the things we're definitely looking at, Kevin, and it's one of the initiatives I think Mayor Levin wants us to take a closer look at.
Right. Which I think makes some sense. So, okay, then what we will do, so we're going to have a meeting on July 20, and then how about August?
August, to be determined. We may end up having only one meeting in August.
And if we do, it is likely the third week of
Correct.
August. That is more likely what we'll do.
Right.
We do have the almost extended care. We're looking at that too sometime in the near future. Coming back as far as their extension and whether their conditional use is still valid or not.
Wow. Okay. That will come back to us.
Yes.
I'm really excited about that. That'd be great. Lisa.
I'm sure they've all got their signs in their garages still, so those will come out. Hey, just curious, what's going on at, and I'm looking kind of eerie here. Sorry about that. My lighting sort of dimmed, I think. What's going on at Columbia and York? It looks like they just tore that building down.
Dentist office, I'm sorry, the MRI the pediatric dentist purchased the MRI building, and he's putting an addition on it and he's going to move his practice over there. So a dentist office.
So is it the dentist that's now on the south side of Columbia? Yep. Then what's going to go in that building? Do we know?
I'm not sure. He rents that building, and he purchased the other buildings.
Okay, well, that'll be good to take care of that eyesore. That MRI building's been empty a long time.
It's a really dysfunctional building. I mean, like you want to take a look at late 1960s, there it is. No offense, but
yeah. It used to be a little bagel store when they first opened it.
Did it? Oh
my son, my 23-year-old was one, and we used to, we'd go in there, they'd always give them like those little mini bagels. Yeah.
Remember that? Wow.
Long time ago.
A lot of history here, though. All right. And then, keep tuned for the method that we're going to be meeting. Some of us have talked about this right before the meeting started. We don't really know how things are going to shake down, but we'll know more after the end of this month. So we'll have an idea. So we may see each other, but go ahead, Eileen.
Oh, I was going to mention too, the zoning ordinance update. So we received a technical review report from the consultant that Emily and Mike and I are going over, and we're going to have a call with them next week. So I don't necessarily have like a timeline for you yet on that, but the zoning ordinance review will be coming up soon as well.
Okay, right. Good, good. All right, any other business that we have? Well, this is really helpful, Eileen. You know, I looked forward with trepidation, like, you know, usually a discussion like this, I would prefer we all were in person and could talk about it. And, but thanks for everybody, you know, for putting forward the effort to discuss this. And there's a lot of content that Eileen provided for us, and we just have to think that through. So thanks. All right, seeing no other business, can I get a motion to adjourn and a second? Sue McCoy moves and a second, Lisa Calloway. Any discussion? All right. Eileen, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner McCoy,
Yes.
Commissioner Calloway,
Yes.
Commissioner Burns,
Yes.
Commissioner Garland,
Yes.
Commissioner Pittman,
Yes.
Commissioner Snyder,
Yes.
Chair Rose.
Yes.